So, following Jesus at the Israel Museum? Well, yes, that can be done too in a virtual way. I am standing here above the exhibition of the most famous archaeological discovery ever made in the Holy Land, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yes, the shrine of the book is behind me, and we will definitely cover it on later on in my vlog. But right now, I want to present to you an amazing 1:50 scale model of Jerusalem in the first century. In the first century, in the time of Jesus. Yes, today if you stand on the Mount of Olives, you see Jerusalem in full beauty. But imagine what it may have looked like in his days when he came as a peasant from the Galilee to that magnificent city. What view did he see? Well, maybe it looked just like this. Is that amazing or what? This is a model made originally in the 1960s in a different location, but now the Israel Museum holds it and also presents it to the public. It is more than 50 years old, but still very relevant as it describes in unparalleled detail various components of what Jerusalem may have looked like in the time of Jesus, although if we want to be really punctual, just a short time after, because it also describes the third city of Jerusalem that was added a decade or so after Jesus was put to death, after he was crucified here in that city. Let's take a closer look now to follow all the small details, all the small details that tell the big story of Jesus in Jerusalem. Nice sunny day. It was cloudy till this morning, but the skies have cleared out, and yet the tourists are not back yet, so we have the site pretty much to ourselves. And before we see the model, I want your attention to this map which presents the site, presents that model in a cartographic easy way to show the whole story. And the story begins in a spring that is called the Gihon. Without that water source, I don't think anyone would have settled here. But it was the reason why Canaanites settled here and later where David created biblical Jerusalem. And although the city was around the spring, the hilltop would be the place where his son Solomon builds the first temple. The temple where the ark was placed, the temple which was destroyed by the Babylonians. But 7 years later, the Jews are back, they rebuild the city, they rebuild the temple, and eventually the city grows to a much bigger size. At first it was protected by a wall to its northern end, dating to the time of the Maccabees. In the days of Herod or so, we believe that he added the second wall to the north. And in the days of his grandson, a third wall, the Agrippus Wall, was added, almost doubling the size of the city, and it was completed when the Jewish rebellion broke out. So this is an image of Jerusalem, a snapshot if you wish, just before the rebellion broke and then the whole city was destroyed by the Romans. The days of Jesus predated by about 30 years. So we need to take off the third wall. This was already exterior, and this is important as we will try to assess also where Jesus was crucified. Where is the Golgotha? Where does it show it on the model? Today, in the model and today, in reality, it's both inside the city, although the text tells us clearly Jesus was crucified outside the city. But remember, Jerusalem in the days of Jesus was not including the new northern suburb. So this is suggested to be the location on the map, and we'll see it in a few minutes also in the model itself. But let's let's start in the most sacred part of the city, the temple. The temple is undoubtedly the focal point of the city, both in Canaanite times and of course in Israelite times and in the days of Jesus as well. The temple was first built by Solomon, and we know about it only from the description of the Bible. We do not have a single stone from the time of Solomon that could be assigned with confidence to his time, to his building. The first temple is all gone. The second temple was also first built by the Jews returning from the Babylonian exile, and it was modest in scale, and we also do not have any sure remains from that period. What we do have with some certainty are remains of the enlargement of the temple, or at least the Temple Mount, first by the Maccabees and then by Herod. In Herod's time, the temple and the city kept expanding, and it reached a size that was so remarkable that Roman historians Pliny the Elder, when he speaks about the East, he said, but Jerusalem is by far the most beautiful of the cities in the East. And what did that city look like for Jesus when he arrives in Jerusalem? So coming from where I'm standing, from the east, he saw it from a higher point where we started, from the top of Mount of Olives. But then in order to visit the Temple Mount, you must be pure. So we know that he goes to the pool of Siloam. The New Testament does not describe him purifying in it, but the Gospel of John does tell us that he went both to the pools of Siloam and the pools of Beth Chisda, and he performed miracles there. In my opinion, he also used the opportunity to purify in them, because it is a required measure if you want to enter the temple itself. And the pool of Siloam is presented here in the model at the bottom of the city of David. Actually, this is really cute. It just rained, and the model of the pool of Siloam holds water today as well. In antiquity, and to this day, we actually found the real pool of Siloam. It is fed by the water of the Gihon spring. The spring itself is not presented in the model, but in reality, it is somewhere there in the valley. This is representing the Kidron Valley. And already in the days of King Hezekiah, a tunnel, an underground tunnel, was carved through the rock under the city to take the water to a secured area in the southern part. That part would be used also in the Second Temple period for purification. And why was there so much investment in purification facilities? Because in the Second Temple period, the Jews were obsessed about purity, and they insisted on purification definitely before going up to the temple. And B, because the numbers of Jews now is so much bigger. Okay, some estimate that the Jews in the first century were 5 to 8 million, which is about 10% of the whole population of the Roman Empire. This is not just natural growth. Judaism was then attracting a lot of people to convert, to become Jews for various reasons, and Jerusalem is the focal point for all of them. Unlike today, where a Jew can congregate in a synagogue to express his devotion to God, then yes, we had synagogues, but there was only one real way to worship that God, and that is by pilgrimage to Jerusalem, giving money to the temple treasures, and of course offering your sacrifice at the temple in front of the building itself where the Holy of Holies was supposed to keep the ark. But sorry. And by the way, I forgot to mention, thank you, Shaked. My son is actually helping me, which enables us to do this so much more smoother and show my face. So before you went to the temple, you had to purify, you had to get your money right, you had to have the right currency to give to the temple taxes, and you had to get a sacrifice. And physically, before you enter, you had to purify, which meant you needed water facilities. And the pool of Siloam was now becoming a giant mikveh, a giant ritual bath, which was proven by archaeology. Yes, one of my chapters will be covering the story of the pool of Siloam, both the miracle that Jesus performed, regaining eyesight to a blind person, but also the archaeological reality telling us that it was the place for purification. And between the pool of Siloam and the Temple Mount itself, there had to be a street. And in the 1960s, Professor Aviona, the general advisor of this model, suggested a stepped street that linked between the pool and the entry to the temple. That was proven to be correct, as we now, to this day, are doing excavations uncovering that stepped street. Parts of it are already open to the public, and it is telling us the path that people probably took to go up to the temple, the path that Jesus may have taken to go to the temple himself. So he goes up that stepped street, and the entry, as the Mishnah tells us, is mostly from the southern side. The temple had a giant plaza around it, equal to about 20 soccer fields, but it was and several gates on all sides. But it was the southern end, the southern side, where the Mishnah tells us that most people would enter. That complex, known as the Hulda gates, had two sets of gates, one on the right. Shekel, are you pointing to it? One on the right for the entry, and one on the left for the exit. And the Mishnah tells us you enter from the right and you exit from the left, unless you are mourning. You had a member in the family that passed away, so you go counterclock, and people see you and express their condolences. Or if you are ostracized, is that the right word in English? If you are kept away from the community, then you go against the crowds and people will stay away from you or something. It's like shaming 2,000 years ago. What's amazing is that archaeology actually revealed the complex next to those gates, and these gates are very visible to this day. The Southern Wall Archaeological Park will definitely be another chapter in my vlog of following Jesus in Jerusalem. So Jesus probably purified in the pool of Siloam. He walked up, not being a priest, not being the king, he probably used the gate system, which is on the right side. The model shows 2 gates. Nowadays we have 3 gates. It's a bit puzzling what exactly was the number of gates in antiquity. But one thing is certain. At the end of this path, you reach the temple itself. And today, when you stand on Mount of Olives, you see the Dome of the Rock. 2,000 years ago, this was probably the image of that temple. A marvelous white edifice, about 50 meters high, made in Greek style, although it's following the biblical command, which is a design that should be really echoing Canaanite temples. But the holiest item that was supposed to be inside the Holy of Holies, it wasn't there. The Ark of the Covenant, that single item that represented the covenant between God and his chosen people, disappeared when the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem. So when the Jews returned from Babylonian exile, it was empty. I know it's hard to believe it, but that was the reality. And the Romans were really puzzled by this as well. These Jews worship only one God. He doesn't have any physical representation. There's no sculpture of their God, and their Holy of Holies is empty. Okay, not to mention the fact that they cut the penises of their newborns, barbarians, yes, and rest one day of the week. These Jews were really, really strange. But yes, they had their habits, they had their practices going back 1,000 years earlier, and they returned and rebuilt the temple. And just imagine, what the model is not showing is the smoke coming up from the courtyard in front of that temple. The endless flow of animal sacrifice that was served there. In my opinion, the biggest barbecue in the history of the Middle East. An endless flow of animal sacrifice to please the Lord, but all done with the intervenience of one class among the Jews, the priestly class. And Jesus didn't like them. And for a good reason. Even the Mishnah admits that they were abusing their power, abusing the fact that they were operating this temple in a monopolistic way, and they were criticized by John the Baptist, by the people of the Dead Sea Scrolls, by the Mishnah, and by Jesus himself. In fact, we are told that what does he do when he goes up to the temple? The first thing, he turns over the tables of the, listen carefully, the dove sellers and the money changers. Why so? Because as I said before, to be a good Jew, you had to give a certain token, a certain kind of coin to the temple treasury, but the priest would only accept one type. Are you catching this? Only one type. This is a replica of it, of course. It was called a shekel. There were two types of shekels. One shekel was used in the one shekel, was minted by a mint called Tyre, Tzor, the Tyrian shekel. That was actually my unfinished PhD, trying to catalog all of those Tyrian shekels. And when the Jews rebelled, it was this type, the rebellion shekel. However, the priest would only accept this coin. So you had to change to this currency. And guess what? The currency rate was outrageous. Okay, the priests were abusing the fact that the Jews had to pay that coin, and they were charging a lot. And the second thing that every Jew had to do here after purification is get an animal sacrifice. And guess what? The priests were monitoring the purchase of those animals, and especially the pigeons, which were the most common sacrifice, so they were selling them for outrageous price. And this we know because the Mishnah tells us so. So Jesus, being upset, saying this is a place of worship, not a place of abuse, he turns the tables of the money changers and the dove sellers. You see, put the historical Jesus in context, and you get a better appreciation of what the New Testament is recording. And the result is, A, the public now likes him. Hey, here is someone finally telling us the truth about the priests and how they're operating the temple. And he gets more followers of him. But the priests now do not like him. He is a clear threat to their authority, to their monopoly, and they will go after him. But for this, you'll have to wait for my chapter vlogging Gethsemane. For now, let's continue walking around the model. And you can see that north of the model, you have here a giant fortress with 4 towers. This is suggested to be the Antonia, the place of the trial of Jesus, which the New Testament tells us was at the Praetorium. Unfortunately, the Praetorium is only mentioned in the New Testament and not by any other sources, and especially not by Josephus, who is such a detailed account of the temple, of Jerusalem, of the time of Jesus, and so on. But archaeological evidence suggests that the Antonia, which Josephus does describe, was here, and Christian tradition argues that the Praetorium was the place of the trial in the Antonia. Okay? That will also be covered in a different chapter. Just remember the image presented here in the model, as well as the image of these 2 colonnaded pools, which are actually holding water. Shekel, are you catching this? There's actually water in those pools also now. Which is cute and rare, and that is simply because it rained recently. Okay, this is the presentation in the model. Hi, Habibi. Okay, let's get off. This is the presentation in the model of the pools of Bet Chisda. The pools of Bet Chisda and the events happening in the pools of Bet Chisda are also recorded only in the Gospel of John, telling us of curing, healing a sick person. And we will go to the actual site of the pools of Bet Chisda. I'm a firm believer of what archaeology discovered in that area, that it is the real pools of Bet Chisda, and we will review what has been discovered, what can be related to Jesus, and what was the real function of those pools aside the place of miraculous healings. Anyway, this is now an image of the new city. In the days of Jesus, all of this was not built yet, and frankly, I have to admit that all of those mansions that you see here were not really found in reality. This area, wherever it was excavated, was actually found quite empty of any architecture in the first century, and it is suggested that it was created as a secluded area, yes, protected, but outside the city, and it was only for the main holidays. When Jews came from different places, they could camp here in tents. Maybe eventually it will be built up, but in the time it was walled, there was barely any buildings inside it. However, and this is inside information I heard from a family member who was involved of making this model, that when it was designed, the owner, who was a businessman, he wanted to create a tourist attraction. He told Aviona, don't leave it empty, it doesn't look good in the camera. Put in whatever. And Aviona created here replicas of mansions, but not from Jerusalem. They are known from South Africa, not South Africa, of course, North Africa, or the Italy itself, or anywhere else in the Roman Empire. They are presenting perhaps a wishful thinking of what Jerusalem would become eventually, but this was never completed. Now, in the days of Jesus, this was all empty, not even walled. Where was the execution? Where was the crucifixion of Jesus and the two thieves? The New Testament gives us only two indications. One, the name of the location, Golgotha, and two, that it was outside the city. And there are two traditions about where that might be. The more plausible, in my opinion, is the site of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But the 19th century scholarship suggested for an alternative location called the Garden Tomb. And the model in the 1960s was trying to please both sides, so it's also presenting that curve. Do you see it, Shekel? There's a bit of water there, and above there's like a horseshoe, kind of a rock formation. That is trying to suggest where the site that the Garden Tomb followers argue is the crucifixion site of Jesus, where it may have been. Why do I not think that the Garden Tomb is the real place of the crucifixion? You'll have to follow me for another chapter, another vlog that will be reviewing the Garden Tomb and the archaeology of it. Walking over towards the western side of the city, here we have the model suggesting the image and the location of the Pesipinus Tower, added after the days of Jesus, but Josephus tells us it was really high, and you could see both the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean. So that gives us a clue of where it may have been, and scholars argue that it might have been in what today we call the Russian compound. And now we are touching base with the Ottoman to modern era walls of the city. This is more or less where Jaffa Gate will eventually be located. In the days of Jesus, Josephus describes the city to have 3 towers adorning the western entry. And of course, we do not have them with us today, but Aviona suggested what they look like. Is the camera showing all 3 of them? Shekel, let's move a bit. There. Now you can see all 3 towers and the temple in the back. But I want your attention to something far more significant over here. Okay, Shekel, point back towards the temple and the Antonia. And let me put my finger in the frame. I can't really see that well. But the camera should show a gate. This is the gate inside the second wall of Jerusalem, which already existed in the time of Jesus. And then to the left of it, there's a big piece of rock. That piece of rock is suggested to be, let's see if I can catch it. That piece of rock is suggested by Aviona to be the original location and shape of the Golgotha, the hill of the crucifixion. So it is suggesting that this is the area where Jesus was crucified, when, of course, all of this suburb was not being built yet. And 30 years after the death of Jesus, the city is all destroyed by the Romans. And only 300 years later, Christianity takes over the Roman Empire, and Helena Augusta comes to Jerusalem, confirming that that is the location, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is built over it. But that is, of course, 4th century and later, when Jerusalem looks completely different, including this area. Now the model is showing what is suggested to be Herod's palace. And yes, we are pretty sure that this is the location of Herod's palace, but we didn't find any of what you're seeing here in the model. Again, Professor Aviona, the scientific advisor of the model from Hebrew University, he just used his knowledge and suggested an educated guess of what Herod's palace may have looked like. Now here's an interesting question. Where was the trial of Jesus? We spoke about this. So I believe that the Crusader identification at the Antonia makes more sense. But there are some scholars, and perhaps some Christians in antiquity, which suggested that it was actually in Herod's palace. So some believe that maybe the Praetorium is really over here. And the place where Pilatus showed Jesus to the public is the big market there in the back. I don't follow this possibility for reasons I will present in detail when we review the Antonia, when we review Herod's palace. But this is how the model shows it. And this is already today's Armenian Quarter and the area of Mount Zion. The model is presenting here a pyramid stepped, a pyramid structure, which is to be identified with David's tomb. That is another very interesting question. David's tomb from the Old Testament was definitely in the city of David, not around here. But both Jewish tradition today and hints even in the New Testament suggest that it was perhaps moved to Mount Zion, and Aviona then suggested that this was the location and this was the shape of it. This is kind of less relevant to our topic. We are following Jesus, and one final subject is, where was Jesus interrogated? First of all, where was the Last Supper? We don't know. It was somewhere on a second floor of some building. As you can see, there are many buildings here, and you can choose any one you want. Today, Christian tradition argues for a specific structure somewhere on Mount Zion. So that was the place where they conducted the Last Supper, in which Jesus said, "The wine is my blood, the bread represents my flesh," and so on. After the Last Supper, they decide to go out of the city, but instead of going all the way to Bethany, probably where they wanted to stay, they decide for some reason to just go across the Kidron and spend the night in an abandoned olive press by the name of Gethsemane. Gethsemane also today is outside the city, so the model does not show it. But it has to be somewhere on that side. But he doesn't stay there for too long, because then the priests come after him, and with Judas, they mark him, they track him, they arrest him, and they take him back into the city. And then the high priest with the Sanhedrin, he interrogates him. Now here's the question, where did that happen? So the Catholic tradition places it somewhere here on the slopes, the site of Petrus in Gallicantu. The Armenian tradition argues no, it happened on the top of Mount Zion. And in my opinion, there could be a third candidate. A candidate found by archaeology in the 1970s beneath the Jewish quarter, suggested by the archaeologists, but then they decided to keep it to themselves because they didn't want that archaeological site to turn into some Catholic shrine. What am I talking about? This, in my opinion, is the best part of my series. I think I have retraced the real place, the best candidate for where the interrogation of Jesus took place. But if you want to know what I'm talking about, you'll have to follow me on my next chapters. So there we go. This is a full circle of this amazing educational tool, a model of Jerusalem, 1:50 scale model in the time of Jesus or just a bit after, but a great tool also to appreciate what it may have looked like in his days. So don't miss my next chapters, and of course, hit subscribe and hit like, spread the news. Danny is reporting about Jesus in the Holy Land, Jesus in Jerusalem, and other fascinating topics of biblical archaeology. So long for now.